festival, so it was chosen. Yeah, that's interesting. So 5 years ago.
So, I may add, because your question is very important. It is interesting, we have to analyze it. If we would have shown the same video in Africa, this discussion would not come up. But if it is shown in Europe, there is this kind of, not to your comment to your question, is that in general, a kind of allergic reaction, oh, we are reproducing the narrative which used to be told by the Europeans, and therefore we have to be cautious that we do not reproduce the narrative. But the thing is, this is not going to solve the problem. The fact that it exists, the problem exists. But the fact that it is shown in Europe does not make it kind of reproducing the narrative. Because if in Africa we are watching the film, we would not raise this question. But if we show it in Europe, we raise this question. And that is, to some extent, this is a colonial concept in the sense that out of bad feeling, the Europeans have developed a feeling of a guilty feeling. So you have to represent Africa in a positive way, otherwise you are reproducing a colonial narrative. And that is meant in a good way, but achieving the wrong thing. And we are not being honest to ourselves. And I tell many colleagues of mine, well, European liberal thinking, because I come also from Peace Studies program. And during our studies, many European students and the North American students, they were extremely cautious so that they do not reproduce this colonial narrative. Therefore, they were always trying to be correct, represent Africa in a positive way, so that this negative narrative is not going to. And I said it is exactly as dangerous as telling wrong things, because you are not honest to yourself. Privately, I know that you think something else, but in public, you are telling something else. And it is self-deception. And many African colleagues, and I very often are given fight, not physically, is that during conferences, especially in Europe, if there are conferences on Africa, it is always telling about positive things about Africa. Positive things, how colonizers were bad, which is right, and how Africa is innocent, which is not always right. But the narrative is we have to represent Africa always in a positive way. And I remember it was last year in Rome, there was a conference on African Economic Network. And people, experts coming from everywhere and talking about colonization was bad, 100% right, but the African part on what is going wrong nowadays, there is nothing about this. When I raised this issue, people considered me kind of as a puppet of Europeans. No, I am not a puppet of Europeans. I am interested that we have to be honest about ourselves. We are doing poorly. In African countries, we are doing poorly. And I tell many African colleagues, and the more African colleagues are in the plane, the better, because I have to confront. Because just telling Africa good narrative, good things, is not going to solve our problems. And therefore, when I watch such a film, this question comes always to mind, which you raised, comes always to my mind. And very often even I feel ashamed. I feel ashamed because why don't we do better? Patriarchy, which we discussed here, so it is prevalent. We know that. Women working the whole day. In many Western African countries, especially, we have a project not only in West Africa but also in Kenya in this case, with many universities, University of Sydney, University of Genoa, with different universities. We have a joint research project on food security. By the way, the project name is called also NIMA. And I was telling to my colleagues, please, we have to be honest. Not just cover up, not just tell good things about Africa. That is self-deception.
I think it's also quite hard to be finger pointing at African countries when we are country in Africa is not doing it right because we're living here in Austria.
Yeah, that's true. There was some one, yeah, it was I think first.
No, for me it was just a thought coming up before because you told us that there are many people very well educated. But my first thought during the movie was also maybe a solution could be the access and the right of education, because also the men seem to be not very well educated. Like the father, he was not able to calculate the simple additions. So that was my inner question, which I was wanting to think out loud.
Tricky because it is tricky. Of course, right to education is important, and I think it's, if you ask me, it's more of a cultural and political problem, because, and just like real life, the policies we have on paper doesn't always translate to what is obtainable in the society. Like I said, in this in the Nigerian community, for instance, or in Nigeria, there are parts of Nigeria that are highly educated people. There are also other parts where, yes, people are not very educated or not even educated at all. So in that case, would you say it is just only a right to education thing? I think you're right. That's where the social workers come in, or social projects, for instance, where maybe people who are affected, you get to understand what the context is. Why do they not want to get educated? Is it a money problem, or is it a cultural problem? Is it a religious problem, which also ties into culture? So it's a there's no one size fits all solution, because in the same society there are people who are highly educated. So if you ask me, it's more of a political problem.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about, because you're repeating about the thing about that the West is scared about reproducing the narrative about Africa. I mean, one point is Africa is like a big continent, like it's huge, and the other thing is, okay, what is another way to deal with that thing? Because I think still it's a really important thing to be aware of it, because Africa is that big, and because I think stereotypes and narratives about places and peoples can go on structures, institutional or individual, have individuals have more individual influence. So.
Okay. I would say the support that, or a way that the West can support Africa should not be more of, oh, we're coming to help you. It should be more of a collaboration. Yes, we have this problem. How can we work together to solve it? And it's interesting that one of you already pointed out from the statistics which was earlier given, that there are actually, for this gender pay gap, that there are actually African countries that can rank better than Austria, that is a developed country. So we see it should be a problem of, oh, we have a problem that is not unique to us. Maybe we have it more or you have it more. How can we collaborate? How can we work together? Like co-creation to ensure that these work. So I think that will be the best approach. Yes.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking about, I mean, I wasn't in North Africa, I just been in South Africa because my partner's family is from there. And when you're in this country, you really feel the apartheid still, and the people who owned the farms are not owning land anymore, and they're like townships, and the next village is like huge houses, and white people are living there, and the opportunities and structural and institutional things are in white hands. So, and then there are collaborations, but it's still the thing of, I mean, I've been there, I helped in townships, I tried to like get the structure there, but it still felt like white people are coming and telling BPUCs how to deal with their problems. Because they have the money, the influence, blah, blah, blah. And that's still a thing which is really, yeah, difficult. And there's still also a trauma in this land, I can feel. Like just with the people I talk to.
I haven't been to Northern Africa before, but I think I understand what you mean, and I sort of agree. And that's where, what I'm saying is like the ideal situation, but on ground, it's not always like that. So if we are co-creating, it means we have equal rights, but that is not the case. With the perfect example you just gave. So.
Modern form of colonialism where now